Dear ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the host plenary of the IAC 2018. It is my pleasure, and I'm actually looking forward now to take a short break from my job as a chair of the local organizing committee and to speak here with you to talk about research under space conditions. So first of all, I would like to give thanks to the IPC, to International Programme Committee, for giving us the chance to have this talk today here. Before we start our space journey into ISS, Moon, and Mars, I would like to welcome our guests from Bremen. We have today here 200 space enthusiasts who got tickets to attend from the city, and I'm really looking forward to say hi. Herzlich willkommen. Welcome to our plenary talk. Now, humankind, I believe, has always been wanting to explore, to know more. And I think that this drive to go beyond is actually what has made us such a successful species. So we can think about when mankind left Africa also to discover the world, later with Columbus to discover America. And also, of course, this drive to go beyond, I think that's what makes us do science. That's the basis for scientific discovery. Because of this drive to go beyond, I think we are really, really lucky that we are now in an era where the colonization of the moon and maybe of Mars are within reach. I think the question is not if, but when will this happen? I think in this room, we are all ready to go, and we wish to go. And for this, today, we have three special guests. We'll have an astronaut, we'll have an expert in space medicine, and also a woman who spent 1 year on Mars, or better said, maybe the closest it can get to Mars here on Earth. Now, our focus tonight is on astronautic missions, and more specifically on the benefit for Earth. What do we get out of all this? The point is that the extraordinary conditions that we have in space are a unique setup for doing science and also to develop new technologies. Now you may think it is a challenge already to live in space, so how can you do science at all up there? And moreover, is it worth to take the pain to do this? Well, I certainly believe it is worth to take the pain. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here tonight. And also because research under space conditions is our job at the CERN. Yeah? We do experiments in our drop tower, parabolic flights, sounding rockets, satellites, in the ISS, International Space Station. There are plenty of examples. Today we'll see a few of them. I can think of material sciences. Taking gravity out of the picture allows us to eliminate convection, and we can produce, for example, extremely pure materials that may be the basis of future displays for your smartphones or computers. And of course, it also allows us to test and extend the boundaries of fundamental physics. And exactly from this domain, I would like to pick an example. That's Bose-Einstein condensates. So these are gases at very, very, very cold temperatures, maybe the coldest in the universe, just above zero. And for dilute gases under these temperatures, then there's quantic behavior at a macroscopic scale. Yeah? Such states were predicted by Satyendra Bose and Albert Einstein in the 20s, and then their observation led to the Nobel Prize in Physics in 2001. Now, in 2010, there was a publication in Science coming from experiments in our drop tower. These were experiments performed by a large cooperation of scientists in Germany, including our institute, the CERN. And there it was possible to go from just milliseconds, which were done in labs before, up to over a second of generation of such Bose-Einstein condensates. This may sound very weird or specific right now, but this type of experiments paved the way for matter wave interferometry. And this, we believe, or my expert colleagues believe that they will lead to a lot of applications in the future. Interferometry, ultra-precision optical clocks, also sensors for local measurements of tiny forces, accelerations, and rotations. That was in the drop tower in 2010, just last year. The first condensate was generating in space, on board a sounding rocket. And the future is the ISS. Through international cooperation, NASA and DLR, we expect to see Bose-Einstein condensates to be created multiple times for long times at the ISS. And I think this will lead to knowledge, and this knowledge will lead to revolutionary technologies, quantum technologies, from we all will benefit. Just as a side remark, if you are interested in the DLR stand here, just next to us, you can visit the capsule of Quantus where these type of experiments are done in the drop tower. Now, the ISS is unique and is great because it allows us to do long-term observations and also to have these observations or these experiments be manipulated live by human beings, by astronauts. Especially if you think about experiments in biology or in the field of medicine, as we'll see later, then these long-term observations are crucial. That's why I'm so happy now to introduce you. It is my pleasure to call Takuya Onishi. Takuya Onishi graduated in aerospace engineering from the University of Tokyo in 1998. After that, he went to work to All Nippon Airways, and while he was completing his training as a pilot, he did also several jobs in the airport, like helping disabled people by check-in. He became a pilot, and he flew very successfully, and then in 2010, he was selected as an astronaut candidate for JAXA, the Japanese Space Agency. And in 2016, at the ISS, he became the first Japanese astronaut to capture the capsule, the spacecraft Cygnus. He spent 4 months there. He did many experiments for JAXA and also for international cooperation partners. And I'm really looking forward to hear to what he has to say. Please welcome Takuya again.
Thank you, Mark, and thanks to everybody for being here. My name is Takuya Onishi. I'm a JAXA astronaut, and I'm a crew member of the ISS Expedition 48 and 49. It's a great pleasure for me to talk about my experience in space at this IAC host plenary session. So since 1961, when the Yuri Gagarin's launch took place, about 500 people have reached or traveled beyond low Earth orbit. So as one of those 500 people, I'd like to introduce an astronaut's life and also our work on board the station. So with our current technology, it's a very short trip to the ISS. It usually takes only 6 hours to get there. And before my flight, many astronauts told me that our home planet was so beautiful when seen from space. Of course, it was very amazingly beautiful for me. However, what amazed me more was the ISS. When I saw the station shining in the dark for the first time from a tiny window of Soyuz capsule, I was very impressed by the fact that human beings have built such an enormous laboratory in space. What is unique about the ISS? There could be multiple answers to that question, but I think microgravity is the most unique aspect of the ISS. Inside the ISS, microgravity conditions are maintained, which enables us to conduct various kinds of experiments and research that we could never do on the ground. And at the same time, because of this aspect, it feels totally different living in space from living on the ground. And now I'm going to show you a quick example. So this is a demonstration of how the most mundane activity, like opening a bag, can change under microgravity conditions. And maybe you have noticed that I was using a rail to keep myself from floating away. So it took me about a week to get used to just flying around the station. It was so difficult for me to stabilize myself. So, did you ever watch an astronaut flying in space like Superman? Yes, I was looking forward to trying this for a long time. Then I discovered it is far more difficult than I thought. So in order to do so, you need to kick against a wall with your 2 feet, putting exactly the same amount of force on each foot. So it was very, very difficult. And using this unique environment, we do a lot of science, which includes experiments and research. And they are the examples of those utilizations of the ISS. And I'm going to talk about more details about them using videos. The first one I'm going to talk about is the first Japanese combustion experiment, which was conducted in the Japanese experiment module. So combustion is a phenomenon we've been using since the beginning of civilization to create energy. However, we still don't know yet exactly how the energy disperses itself among small droplets of liquid fuel. Since there is no thermal convection in space, space is the best environment to observe and understand this phenomenon. And using this understanding, we can use this understanding for more precise mathematical simulations to develop engines for any kind of vehicles that use liquid fuel. So I had a chance to assemble the combustion chamber on board the station, and the ground team took care of most of the rest of the experiment. Here you can see how a combustion process spreads throughout randomly distributed fuel droplets. Very interesting, isn't it? And let's move on to the next example. This device is called ELF, the Electrostatic Levitation Furnace. So instead of building a furnace with steel walls, we use electrostatic force to levitate a small piece of sample and to control its position. And why do we do this on board the station? Because actually we can use this type of technology on the ground. However, the range of materials we can levitate is much limited on the ground. In space, we can levitate non-metallic samples like oxides with much less energy. That is why we do this experiment in space. I majored in aeronautical materials science, so I was really glad to be able to work on this type of experiment. And the third one is protein crystal growth experiment. This is called the PCG. Because of the lack of gravity, there is much less convection in space. So crystals can grow evenly, and space crystals are much higher quality than those from the ground. And we send proteins that cause diseases and bring back those crystals. And by analyzing those high-quality crystals, maybe we can create new medicine to counteract those diseases. So it's like checking the exact shape of a keyhole in order to make an appropriate key. So this experiment is very sensitive to vibration and shocks. So I still remember that when I inserted the protein container to the experimental device, I was a little bit tense and I handled it like a newborn baby. Of course, there are more things to do on board the station. So in order to keep all systems in a good shape, we needed to do regular maintenance. And if a space toilet breaks down, we are the one who has to fix it because there's no plumber we can call for help from space. And not only the internal hardware, but also the external hardware could break in such cases, or in case we need to install a new piece of hardware, we do perform spacewalk. Spacewalk is one of the most challenging tasks we do perform on board the station because there are so many risks we need to manage. In order to keep astronauts alive, we need a fair amount of supplies, and those supplies are delivered by cargo spacecraft like this one. And I had a chance to capture this vehicle. Maybe I need to add an explanation about the word capture. So these cargo spacecraft don't have a capability to perform automated docking. Instead, they approach the station and hold its position as close as 10 meters from the station. Then astronauts manipulate the ISS robotic arm to grab them. So this is very similar to flying an airplane, like I did previously. So this is another example of very challenging task for astronauts on board the station because the last moment of operation really depends on your technical skills. So I felt the pressure that I had never experienced before. But I made it. And this is the internal photo of the Cygnus vehicle. So those cargo spacecrafts can deliver tons of supplies, including space food. So talking about space food, we eat 3 times a day, just like you guys do on the ground. And maybe you have noticed that my face looks different in this picture. It's kind of swollen, so this is caused by fluid shift. This is one of the side effects of spaceflight. And another significant side effect of spaceflight is the loss of bone density and muscles. That is why we do exercises for 2 hours every single day in order to prevent it. It is also very important for us to maintain not only physical health, but also psychological health. And for me, it was always fun, a lot of fun to talk to people from space. And I especially enjoyed events with younger generations. So here I was trying to mix 2 liquid bowls. The white one is milk, and the brown one was coffee. So this is an experiment of making space cafe au lait. And this was probably the most expensive cafe au lait in our history. So I couldn't help tasting it. But unfortunately, the taste was terrible. Maybe you can see my face. But it was good. So while I was on board the station, I never felt that I was confined in a small space because the ISS is huge. And also, as the crew, we spent quite a large amount of time together as a crew throughout our training. So we had built very good relationship even before our expedition started. So sometimes we had a group dinner, then that helped us a lot to maintain our both mental health and also physical health. So the limited space environment didn't seem to me to have any real effects on our relationship as a crew. So we had a lot of fun throughout our mission. And time flies. It was time for us to go home. After 113 days on the station, our Soyuz capsule safely returned and landed on the steppes in Kazakhstan. That was a great moment of satisfaction, making dreams from childhood come true, and relief. And last but not least, I want to talk about the psychological effect of a long-distance spaceflight for astronauts. So after my flight, I did a lot of PRs, and one of the most common questions I got is this one. Did you ever get scared while you were in space? And my answer is no. Honestly speaking, I never felt that I was in a dangerous situation at all. And I'm going to explain couple of reasons. So the station has a window module, it's called a cupola, and every time I looked outside from that window module, the Earth was there, and it occupied almost the entire view. And it changed its face each time I go there. And the views were just fantastic. And that made me feel that I was always within reach of my home planet. It is true, things can break on board the station. But as I said, we had regular visits of cargo spacecraft that delivered all we needed: food, clothes, hygiene supplies, and spare pieces of hardware. And even in case of emergency, we can just simply jump into our Soyuz vehicle and come home within a few hours. So I have to admit that these facts gave me huge relief throughout our mission. Then in the future, if you go to the moon, you'll see your Earth like this. So what do you think? Are you still comfortable, or do you still feel you are still connected to your home planet? Maybe yes, and maybe no. I think it totally depends on the person. Then what if you go to Mars? I'm not sure when it's gonna happen, but I'm sure it's gonna be a long trip. You won't see people other than your crewmates for more than 2 years. After a long journey, when you land on the surface of Mars, you'll see your home planet like this. This image was taken from the NASA's Mars rover. I cannot imagine how hard it will be, both technically and psychologically, for astronauts. So from my experience, it is obvious that we cannot go to Mars right away. So, like this mission logo, we need to do this step by step, very carefully and very steadily. So before we go to Mars, we need to go back to the moon. And also we can use the ISS as a test bed to polish our existing technology as well as to test our new technology to get to Mars. So increasing the reliability for many things, for everything, is the key for long distance future space exploration. And I think that's all about it. And I hope you enjoyed some of my stories. And thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Takuya. And now that we have heard about the personal experience of performing research under space conditions, we would like actually to turn to the science in these experiments. And today we have selected experiments which are particularly interesting because the subjects under experimentation are the astronauts themselves. We have seen how important it is to understand how the body behaves when we are under the absence of gravity or felt absence of gravity. Our body realizes quickly and there are severe consequences, manifold consequences. Now, our next guest will analyze this from an objective point of view. Moreover, he will also take us back from the ISS to the Earth because his findings are benefiting the Earth. Professor Hans Christian Gunga studied geology and paleontology at the University of Münster, and he graduated in 1980. He had his first contact with space technologies when he performed geostudies in Spain with remote sensing data from Landsat 2, and then he decided to study medicine also at Münster. And later he specialized in physiology under extreme conditions. 2004, he became professor of the Department of Physiology of the Charité, or University of Medicine Berlin. And he's nowadays speaker of the Center for Space Medicine and Extreme Environments. Please, welcome Hans Christian Gunga.
Thank you. Yeah, good evening, everybody. I will explain one medical experiment. There are several medical experiments on the International Space Station, but I will focus on mine, a very small experiment. And actually, when you are sitting there or standing there behind, this is your magic number. It's your core temperature in your body. If you are 1 degree higher, you have already decrements in your mental performance. If you are 1 degree lower, it's the same. And actually, when you look at the human body, it's always changing its temperature. You see here, this is under cold conditions at 10 degrees, like today. Here, that is the core where you have your maximum 37 degrees. There's a slight variation during the day, but you see here as well, under hot conditions, this core is expanding to the periphery of your body. And you see, in some parts, you actually have probably only 28 degrees or 29 degrees. If you would have that at your heart, you will die. You will have a asystole, or at least you will have some arrhythmias due to the low temperature. So my message is that you realize that you have a core with a brain, with a heart, with a kidney, with a lung, which should have permanently at its best 36.5, maximum 37 degrees. And now comes the point when you want to measure such a temperature in astronauts, you have a challenging problem. And I will explain that with my sensor, which I have here in my jacket. This is a sensor actually we use on the International Space Station, and you will just see how it works. The main problem is, if you want to get into that core, you usually have to go into your rectum 8 centimeters, at least. Most of the people don't like that. Astronauts too. So if you really want to have success, you should think about something that's different. There are other places, like here in the axilla or in the mouth, but they are not reliable. That's why we were experimenting with a sensor which is placed actually like this at the head at the astronaut. And actually the head, as everybody can really easily assume, is the most important organ we have. If we don't have our head under certain conditions, you will have really big problems. So we developed this device for astronauts to measure their temperature inside the brain. And why is that important, especially in astronauts? And I've just talked before with the astronaut, and he really could confirm that once more. We have a problem under microgravity conditions that we are not so easy to get rid of our temperature, what we have. Because here, when I would stand here naked, about 600 liters of air would go along my body. Lower part, cool air, upper part, warm air. But in space, you have not this convection, except if you have a ventilator and directly in your face. So the problem is that you are immersed, if you say, you are immersed in your own temperature field. And that makes it quite reasonable, and that was the hypothesis, that if you do exercise in space, like you have to perform every day 1 hour or 2 hours, you might probably get faster to a higher temperature than on a similar experiment which we have performed before and after spaceflight. So that was the background for this experiment, and we will look at one of those experiments, what you see here. So we have a classical ergometer test. The astronaut is working. Here the data are stored. Here at the head is a sensor. And in addition, what is most important, I think, thanks especially to my co-workers and other experimenters, that we were able to have, in addition, the oxygen consumption. That is important, that we really can calculate how much they work, how heavy they work. So to get an adjustment of their capacity to workload. And this experiment was only designed for 8 minutes. And now we look at the data on ground. So before we were going into space, you see here on Earth the resting value of these 11 astronauts, 4 women, 7 men, were exactly what you usually expect, 36.3. After exercise, this short exercise on ground, you increase your temperature to 38. That is a normal increase in your temperature. Now we are going into space, and we had different, actually every month we were able to conduct such an experiment. And you see easily that during the same exercise with the same workload, we have sometimes temperature above 40. The highest temperature we had were 41 plus 2, so 0.2. So this is really a fair high temperature for a short period of time. But in addition, and that is, I think, the most interesting thing for me as a scientist, you get surprised. This was something we really expected, as I explained. That was our hypothesis. But when you look at this point here, this is interesting. Because obviously the astronauts in about 80 days, 8 weeks, so approximately 3 months, they slightly increase their temperature under resting conditions. So it's like you would have now not 36.5, but you are 1 degree, 1.2 degree higher. One can say, okay, what does it matter, 1 degree, it's only a little bit. But this is a lot of energy which is produced and has to be calculated in any kind of energy consumption of the astronaut. And in addition, you are relatively fast at your end, because the highest temperature you can reach when the proteins denaturate is 43 or 44. So there is only a very, very limited range of temperature. Just yesterday, I get the information that one of the German newspapers make some remarks about why is it all good for research for Earth, or the benefits that was mentioned before. I would say make your own or form your own opinion about the next three applications of this method. Here we see we are just in the procedure of doing several experiments with firefighters, where this sensor is now used here on Earth, integrated into the helmet of firefighters. Next step is that we have about 20 million people in clinics with a full narcosis here in Europe every year. And during this full narcosis, your body is not able to really thermoregulate. You behave like a reptile, so to say. You cool down, and that is extremely important for your immune system. You will hear during some of the lectures other presenters who show how important that is. So if you drop now your temperature, you have a higher increase of certain and secondary infections. So permanently, let's say for 8 or 10 hours after you haven't been under an operation in the clinic, to protocol your temperature is a very important message for your outcome in the clinics. So this is now a device which is since last year on the market for the clinics. And when we look at the motto of this Congress, involving everyone, I think that is a good last slide what I have. Really involve also our premature babies, because premature babies have also no thermoregulation. They have to have their incubator. And what we are trying to do for the moment is that the incubator is monitored by the temperature of this infant. So we have a certain loop of the core temperature of these very small individual, which is controlling his own environment. And I think this is something really what space is all about. You think not in the beginning where it's coming out, but that is science. And I think that's the best science, that you can have nice hypotheses, but to look at what is coming out later, that is the most impressive thing. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.
The International Space Station is not only a scientific laboratory, but also the largest and most complex international technology project in the history of humankind. It is the proof that continuous teamwork between several nations is possible, independently of whatever political trends there are. If we want to go deeper in space, this will be definitely necessary. I believe even cooperation will have to be made more intensive. So now we would like to continue from the Earth and ISS toward the Moon and Mars. And to discuss this, we'll have our next guest, who spent 1 year with 5 others in Hawaii. And I can tell you she was not surfing on the ocean, she was on a volcano. And it is my pleasure to call here Christiane Heinecke to the stage. Christiane received a Bachelor in Applied Physics from the Technical University of Ilmenau, here in Germany. She went to Sweden and then got a Master in Geophysics, University of Uppsala. Came back to Germany to get a PhD in engineering at the University of Ilmenau, working on liquid metal flows. Went to Finland, where she was a postdoc in the Aalto University studying ice fracture and melting. And during this postdoc, she just escaped to Hawaii, to simulate life in Mars. And she's now at the SARM. Please welcome Christiane Heinecke on stage.
Mars is a little red planet about 1/3 the size of planet Earth, and currently 89 million kilometers away from us. It has a fascinating landscape. It's home to canyons larger than the Grand Canyon and mountains taller than Mount Everest. In fact, the largest mountain in the solar system is located on Mars. Its name is Olympus Mons, and it's a shield volcano. And I would like to take you on a journey to one of the largest shield volcanoes here on Earth. It's also taller than Mount Everest, if you measure from the top to the base, which happens to be below sea level. And about 2 years ago, I have lived on this gigantic volcano. The landscape I was surrounded by was lava rock, red and brown and gray and black. Some would call this landscape barren, but to me, it's incredibly beautiful. And I've lived there for an experiment that was run by the University of Hawaii and funded by NASA. The purpose of this experiment was to simulate life on Mars. And you can hardly find a better place for that than the slopes of the Mauna Loa volcano on the big island of Hawaii. The name of the experiment was HI-SEAS, which stands for Hawaii Space Exploration Analog and Simulation. And for this experiment, I've lived inside a simulated Mars space, which we call the habitat, and that you can see in the background here. And I've lived there with 5 other people for an entire year. Just like on Mars, where you cannot go to the movies or invite people over for a party, even if it's your birthday. Yeah, you heard that right. We did not see any other human being besides the 6 of us for an entire year. And what's more, we did not just simulate the isolation, but also the distance. The largest possible distance between Earth and Mars is 400 million kilometers. At that distance, if you send a message from one planet to the other, it's on the way for about 20 minutes. I don't know about you guys, but if I was talking on the phone and had to wait for the response 40 minutes, 20 minutes there, 20 minutes back, I would have forgotten whatever it said. So the only feasible means of communication is via email, including mission support, friends, and family. For an entire year, I did not get to see my family, did not get to speak with my friends. We could only exchange emails and video messages. I missed Christmas, Easter, and the birthday of every single person who was important to me and not with me on simulated Mars. But the point of ICs is not to make the crew suffer, at least not for the sake of suffering. The point of ICs is to understand how humans behave and how they change when they're living in extended isolation and confinement. Because if we want to send humans to Mars, we better make sure that the crew gets along with each other. You have this one colleague that you can't really stand. Now, if you only see them for work, you can get away from them. You go home after work, you have weekends, you have vacation. Hey, if you have an argument, you can just slam the door, go outside, and take a deep breath. On Mars, you don't have that luxury. You're stuck inside the habitat with the same people, day in and day out. You get along or you don't, doesn't matter. You can't get away. Now, history teaches us that such a situation can be lethal. Polar explorers have died under mysterious circumstances. Ship voyages have ended in mutiny. We have plenty of evidence that exploration missions can fail if the crew doesn't get along. My point is, if we want to send humans to Mars, we better make sure that the crew doesn't sabotage and kill each other on the way there. Let me talk about resources a bit. Water is extremely precious on Mars. I mean, obviously, there are no lakes, there are no rivers on Mars. It doesn't rain on Mars. So in our simulated Mars space, we had limited water too. And we had a guideline that said not to shower more than 8 minutes per week. So most of us took a shower every few days. And we had this little competition going on of who could take the shortest showers. Mine usually lasted around 2 minutes, but the winner, the shortest shower on simulated Mars, was 24 seconds. Now, imagine me coming back after high seas, and for the first time, standing in front of a swimming pool. I was dirty, I was sweaty, and I was supposed to step into this pool of precious clean water. I couldn't help but ask myself if this pool of water contained more or less water than we had used in that entire year. You guys are scaring me. You're so many. I can deal with 5 people, but not with so many. So I did go into this pool of water eventually, but it took me quite some effort. I had to persuade myself. It's okay. That's how they do it here on Earth. It's perfectly normal to waste a pool full of precious clean water. It's perfectly normal to pollute the lakes and rivers that we're drinking from. It's perfectly normal to pollute the air that we breathe. But that's on Earth. Let's go back to Mars. So, high seas gave us a very realistic isolation from humanity, and we had limited resources. But the habitat would by no means allow us to survive on Mars. Why is that? Well, for example, we didn't clean our water, but our wastewater would simply go outside for evaporation. We didn't clean our air, but we would just pump in fresh air from the outside. I mean, the habitat wasn't even airtight to begin with. Our shield against cosmic radiation was a piece of fabric. And I could go on with this, but don't get me wrong. The high seas habitat is great for the purpose it's intended for, which is psychological studies and an Earth-based simulation. But the thing is, when I came back from high seas, I kept brooding about this habitat, about the simulated habitat, because it's not just high seas. It's any habitat that exists today is built for an Earth-based simulation. Now, at the same time, we are watching with fascination the latest developments in launch technology. Last year at this conference, the audience was cheering when Elon Musk presented his latest Falcons and Dragons. But let me quote Buzz Aldrin here. Elon Musk is a transportation person. He's not a housing person. In other words, we don't have a clear plan of what to do once we do get to Mars. Now, I'm a physicist and engineer. And the physicist in me is good at understanding why something doesn't work. The engineer in me is good at finding solutions to the things that don't work. Plus, I had an entire year to look at the high seas habitat and find out all the reasons why it wouldn't work. So that's why I started working at the ZORM here in Bremen last year. My goal is to create a functional habitat, one that we could copy and paste, put on the moon, and later on Mars for humans to live inside. Now, there's already plenty of habitat designs out there. The thing is, most of them have been designed by architects, which usually means they're not even close to functional. Some of them have been designed by engineers, which makes them more functional, but also pretty ugly and depressing to live in. Now, my advantage is that I have both the engineering background to create a functional habitat, but I've also lived under realistic conditions. I know from personal experience how important it is for every crew member to have their own room where they can be by themselves. I know how important it is to have, at the same time, to have a large common room where the crew can be together comfortably and share their meals. I know how important it is to have a window, even though the engineer in me understands how difficult it is to have a window in a pressure vessel. But the one window that we had at high seas, that was the favorite place of the whole crew. Now, the habitat that we are building at the ZARM is based on all those lessons and experiences from high seas and other simulations. The name of the habitat is MAMBA, which is short for Moon and Mars Space Analog. And the purpose of MAMBA is for scientists and engineers from around the world to test their system components inside this habitat under realistic conditions. I mean, life support system, water reclamation system, energy systems, rover maintenance, you name it. My dream is, of course, that one day Mamba will be standing on the moon, later on Mars, or at least something that's heavily inspired by it. But in the end, it doesn't really matter if the habitat is built by German engineers or any other spacefaring nation. Because the first humans to set foot on Mars, they will inspire. Humans on Mars will inspire the rest of humanity back here on Earth. Because if they can survive on Mars, then we can save water too, and we can keep our air clean, and we can use the energy resources that we have available rather than living at the expense of our children. If they can live on Mars, if they can survive on Mars, then we can live on Earth sustainably. Now, I don't believe that we will become better humans if some of us get to walk around on Mars. But I do believe in inspiration of concrete technological development. Because the things that we need on Mars are the same that we need here on Earth. Technology to clean our water and our air, reliable energy sources and storage, plants that can cope with little resources and little space, better medical care. And yes, we're already working on all of these problems. But scientists and engineers love looking at the extreme to be better prepared for the norm. And I'm saying that I'm kind of thinking of a bathtub here. You know, you can be inside your bathtub and be comfortable. But if you stay there, you will never learn how to swim. And you will never be able to cross an entire ocean. But imagine if we did learn how to swim as a species, well, metaphorically speaking. Imagine all the things that we could do if we do get to Mars. I will give you some help here. The area in which the Curiosity rover is moving spans a geological age of close to 1 billion years. In the 6 years of being there, the Curiosity rover has taken less than 20 drill samples. 20. In biology, that would be like finding a dinosaur bone and trying to understand the human skeleton. Now, if we look at the moon for comparison, the Russians brought back samples from the moon robotically from 3 different locations, which is a great achievement. The Apollo astronauts brought back samples from 2,000 distinct locations. Obviously, most of the knowledge that we have about the moon today stems from those 6 human missions. And speaking of the moon, from the far side of the moon, we can look farther back into the history of our universe than we ever could with an Earth-based telescope. Geologists are craving to get to the moon to find out why it's so big, why it's there in the first place. And coming back to Mars one last time, biologists can't wait to get to Mars to find out if there's ever been life on Mars, and if there has, if it's related to us. But these are almost philosophical questions. Let me finish my talk tonight with a more practical question. Can humans live on Mars? And my answer for you tonight is that yes, I am living proof that humans can deal with the extended isolation and confinement. And I can assure you that the ZARM is not the only place where scientists and engineers are working towards providing the technology to live on Mars. If we join forces, We can do this. Yes, we can get our ass to Mars.
Ladies and gentlemen, I believe that this human drive to explore is unstoppable. I think it is the key to a better future. And I think that beyond the Earth, there are many opportunities for humankind that we need to explore. Now, I will certainly be happy not to be one of these pioneers. The Earth is just too beautiful to live it. But I think it is a necessary step. So I hope that we could convince you that it is really worth to take this pain, to live and work at ISS, Moon and Mars. Let us make just this happen. Now, as local host, I would like to thank you again all for coming to Bremen. I have special thanks also for the people from Bremen who are today sitting with us enjoying this event. Please come back for the public day to see the live event with Alexander Gerst. For the rest of the participants of this conference of the IAC, I would like to invite you now to the welcome reception in the festival hall, which is just next to us, here to your left hand. We have organized an authentic maritime festival with delicious specialties from the North German coast. So please, we are looking forward to seeing you there. Thank you for your attention.